I was only 12 years old when I first heard the whispers of Hollow Parish. My father called it a cursed village, though he never explained why. My mother would hush him whenever the subject arose, as if speaking its name too often would summon misfortune to our own home. Yet among the boys my age, it was the one story we were desperate to know. The elders' silence only deepened our curiosity. To us, Hollow Parish was not a real place. It was a myth that lived between the cracks of forgotten maps, a ghost village buried under the weight of its own sorrow. The name alone carried weight. Hollow Parish. It suggested emptiness, a congregation. Without faith, a settlement left bare by time. For years it was said that no priest ever stayed there long, no crops ever flourished, and no family truly thrived. And yet people once lived there. They tilled its land, raised their children, and prayed in its chapel. That much was certain, for the ruins still stood less than a day's walk from where I lived. What I did not know then was that the ruins marked the resting place of nearly an entire village, a burial so vast and deliberate that it erased Hollow Parish not just from maps, but from memory. The mass burial was spoken of only in hushed tones by the few who claimed to remember. To them, it was not merely a graveyard, but a wound carved into the soil of our land, too deep to heal. I had always thought that history lived in the pages of books, preserved by monks with quills and candlelight. But the story of Hollow Parish lived in silence. It was not written down. It was hidden, passed carefully from tongue to ear, like a dangerous secret. And when something is hidden so carefully, you begin to suspect it is not simply because it is sad. It is because it is shameful. It was my grandfather, the only one who dared to tell me more, who finally broke the silence. We were sitting by the hearth on a night when the wind howled like wolves through the cracks of our wooden home. I asked him again, too boldly this time, "Grandfather, what happened to Hollow Parish?" My mother, busy sewing in the corner, gave me a look that warned me to stop. But the old man leaned forward, his eyes glinting with the fire's reflection, and said words I would never forget. "They buried them all together, boy. Not in coffins, not in neat rows, but in one grave, so wide it swallowed the parish whole." His words chilled me, and I thought at first that he meant soldiers had slaughtered them in war, but he shook his head, reading my thoughts. No army came for them. They were undone by something else. Some say it was famine, others plague, others punishment from above. But the truth is murkier. The truth is not told. I pressed him, desperate to understand. He sighed and lowered his voice to nearly a whisper. "You must know, the Hollow Parish was never like other villages. It sat in the valley where fog never lifted, where the sun was pale even at noon. The people there, they lived strangely. They kept to themselves. They had no feast days, no market fairs. Their parish priest spoke sermons unlike any other, filled with words no one could quite recall after hearing. And when the end came, no priest from beyond their valley came to bless them. No one came at all. Only silence followed." I shivered, not only from the cold, but from the weight of his words. The thought of an entire village buried in one grave, nameless, unremembered, made me uneasy in a way I could not explain. Yet I wanted to know more, needed to know more. I asked how they were buried, who had done it. Grandfather's gaze grew distant. The ones who buried them, they did not speak of it after. They did it quickly, some say at night. They wanted no memory of it. And perhaps they feared what lingered in the parish. But the soil remembers, boy. The earth does not forget. That night, I lay awake long after the fire had burned down, staring into the darkness of our cottage. I imagined a vast pit in the fog-filled valley filled with men, women, and children who once laughed and lived as we did all swallowed by earth without a stone to mark their passing. I imagined the fog rolling endlessly over that valley, as if trying to hide what lay beneath. And in that moment, I resolved that one day I would see Hollow Parish with my own eyes. But seeing is not the same as understanding. I did not yet know that the story of Hollow Parish was not only about death, but about the choices of the living. The mass burial was not simply the closing of lives, but the sealing away of something far more haunting, a truth too heavy for anyone to speak aloud. Weeks. Later, when I ventured too far into the fields with the other boys, I thought I saw the valley in the distance. A shrouded hollow where the fog pooled thick and low, unmoving even when the wind swept across the hills. The others dared me to go closer, but my steps faltered. It was not fear of getting lost. It was the feeling that if I crossed into that fog, I would never be the same again. The air itself seemed to guard the parish, thick with warnings only my bones could hear, and so, for a time, I stayed away. But the story of the mass burial gnawed at me. I asked questions where I could, of farmers, of shepherds, of passing traders. Most denied knowing anything, some changed the subject, and a few crossed themselves as though warding off an unseen curse. The more they tried to silence me, the more certain I became that Hollow Parish was not a myth. It was real. Its graves were real. Its silence was real. It was in that silence that I felt the truth waiting, heavy and unspoken. I did not yet understand that by searching for it, I was following the same path as those who had once dug the earth and covered the parish in soil. For history is not just the story of what happened, it is also the story of what people tried to hide. And Hollow Parish, with its mass burial, was the deepest hiding place I had ever known. The first time I truly set foot near Hollow Parish, I was 14. By then, the story had taken hold of me like a fever that would not break. Grandfather's whispers had sunk deep into my heart, and every night when the wind rattled our shutters, I imagined the valley calling my name. My friends spoke of it with the daring of boys, always threatening to go there, always backing away at the last moment. But I could not let it go. I wanted to see if the land itself carried the weight of what had been done there. It was early autumn when I went. The air was crisp, the fields brittle with the remains of harvest, and the sky carried that pale light which makes the world seem thinner. I took no one with me. Not because I wished to be brave, but because I knew none of the others truly wanted to see Hollow Parish, and I did not want their laughter to drown out the silence I was seeking. I left before dawn, with only bread in my satchel and a stick in my hand. The path to the valley was not marked. It wound through thickets and half-forgotten trails that shepherds avoided. I followed the faint signs, broken fences, stone walls. Toppled and reclaimed by moss, the ghost of an old road that once must have led wagons to the village. The closer I drew, the quieter the countryside became. Even the crows seemed to fly wide of that hollow. I noticed, too, that the wind changed. There, where the hills above were swept clean, the air within the valley grew still, heavy, as if pressing down upon me. And then I saw it. Hollow Parish, or rather what was left of it. At the edge of the fog sat the remains of cottages, their walls blackened and roofs long fallen. A chapel stood crooked, its steeple broken in half, pointing not toward the heavens but toward the ground, as if dragged down by the weight of what had occurred. No smoke rose from hearths, no laughter echoed, no footsteps stirred the earth. It was as though time itself had recoiled from the place. I stopped at the edge, breath caught in my throat. My feet refused to carry me forward. The silence of the parish was not like any silence I had known. It was not peace, nor rest, but an absence so complete that it rang in my ears. The fog drifted between the ruins, curling and folding in shapes that almost seemed alive. For a moment, I thought I saw figures moving in it. But when I blinked, they were gone. I forced myself closer, one step, then another until I stood before the chapel. Its wooden door was rotted through, its stone steps cracked. I wanted to enter, but something within me balked. The stories of strange sermons whispered by its priest rang in my head, and I wondered if words once spoken there still clung to the air, unwilling to leave. Instead, I turned toward the ground behind the chapel. The soil was uneven, sloping gently, as though it had been disturbed long ago and never set right. The grass grew thin there, struggling, and when the wind did stir faintly, it bent the grass as if tracing lines across the earth. I knew then what I was seeing. This was no simple clearing. It was the burial ground my grandfather had spoken of. I knelt and pressed my hand to the earth. It was cold, colder than the air around me, as though the soil itself carried the chill of what lay beneath. My mind flooded with questions. Who had dug this vast grave? Were they villagers themselves, trying to bury their dead before they too succumbed? Or were they strangers, come after, shovels in hand, performing the task no one wanted to speak of? And what fate had required them to bury all together, without names, without stones, without prayers? I lingered there for hours, staring, listening. The wind carried faint sounds through the valley, though I could never tell if they were real, or tricks of my imagination. The creak of wood, the murmur of voices, the rhythm of a bell long rusted. At one point I thought I heard the faint sob of a child. My heart pounded, and I looked around, but the fog only thickened. It was then I understood why no one spoke of Hollow Parish. It was not just sorrow that kept them silent, but fear. To stand in that place was to feel that what had been buried was not entirely gone. Something lingered, clinging to the parish with a grip as strong as roots. The people had been buried, yes, but their memory, or something more, remained. When at last I turned to leave, I found it strangely difficult to pull my feet away. The fog seemed to cling to me, tugging at my clothes like unseen hands. Only when I forced myself up the slope, out of the valley's hollow, did the air grow lighter. The moment I reached the ridge, the wind rushed around me again, and the world seemed alive once more. Birds wheeled overhead, the sky opened wide, and I realized I had been holding my breath for far too long. That night, back in my bed, I could not sleep. The image of the uneven soil behind the chapel stayed with me, as if I had carried it back in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fog curling and imagined voices calling from beneath the earth. My mother scolded me when she saw the dirt on my boots and guessed where I had been. She refused to speak to me for a day after, muttering prayers under her breath. My father only gave me a hard stare, as though he feared I had brought the parish's curse into our home. But my grandfather, he only looked at me with sorrow. "You've seen it now," he said quietly, "and once you've seen it, boy, you cannot unsee. Remember this. Hollow Parish was not buried for the dead's sake, but for the living's. They wanted to cover what happened, so that no boy like you would ever walk where you've walked." His words troubled me, for if the burial had been to protect the living, then whatever had happened there was not merely tragedy. It was something darker, something people believed must never be remembered. Yet I could not stop remembering. The weeks after my journey into Hollow Parish were the longest of my young life. I carried the valley with me in my thoughts, unable to escape its presence. Every creak of the cottage beams at night reminded me of the broken chapel. Every gust of wind across the field sounded like that faint phantom bell. I could not tell if the silence I'd felt there had followed me home, or if I had simply left part of myself behind in that hollow ground. Grandfather noticed it most. He would watch me when I thought no one else was looking, his old eyes heavy with worry. One evening, when the rest of the family was asleep, He sat beside me by the dying fire. "You've been marked by it, haven't you, boy?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to deny it, but words failed me. I nodded. Instead, ashamed, as though I had broken some sacred boundary. He sighed. "Then you must hear what I never told you before. Perhaps if you understand, you'll stop chasing it." My heart pounded. This was what I had been waiting for. Truth, or at least some fragment of it. I leaned forward, desperate to catch every word. "Long ago," Grandfather began, "before your father was born, Hollow Parish was not so different from other villages. The people were poor, yes, but they lived as all others did, plowing fields, tending animals, gathering at their chapel. But something changed when their new priest arrived. No one recalls where he came from, only that he brought with him a voice that drew men and women to listen. He spoke of things not written in Scripture, things that stirred the hearts of his flock. They grew more devoted to him than to the church itself. Some say he promised them deliverance from famine, from sickness, from death itself, and in their desperation they believed him." I frowned. "Was he a bad man?" Grandfather shook his head slowly. "Not bad, perhaps, but dangerous. He gave them hope of a kind too great for mortal men to carry. And when harvests failed and sickness spread, they clung to his words instead of turning outward for help. Hollow Parish shut itself away. They trusted only their priest and whatever rituals he led within that chapel. A chill ran through me. I remembered the strange air that clung to the broken steeple. "What rituals?" I asked. Grandfather's gaze darkened. "That is the part no one tells. Some claim they prayed day and night, refusing to eat, wasting away by choice. Others whisper they took to practices not blessed by the church, chants in forgotten tongues, marks carved into wood and flesh. Whatever the truth, they stopped being like other villages. They became other." I swallowed hard, my mind filled with images I didn't want but could not stop imagining. "And then they all died?" "Yes," Grandfather said. "One winter, so suddenly it seemed the valley swallowed them whole. When word reached nearby villages, men went to see what had happened. What they found was—" He trailed off, his voice catching. For a long moment, he stared into the fire, as though seeing something within it. "What did they find?" I pressed. He closed his eyes. "They found the parish silent, the people lying in their homes, in the chapel, in the fields. Not buried, not cared for, just left, as though death had passed through the valley in a single breath. The smell was unbearable, and the fear that whatever had taken them might spread, drove the men to do the only thing they thought would keep it contained. They dug, and they buried, all together. No prayers, no rites, no names, just soil over silence. My skin prickled. The picture was clearer now, but no less haunting. "And the priest?" I whispered. "What became of him?" Grandfather's eyes opened, and for the first time I saw fear in them. "No one knows. His body was never found among the rest." The fire cracked, sending sparks upward, and I shivered. That absence seemed to me the most terrible part of the tale. If the priest had been the heart of the parish, then his missing body was a shadow that stretched beyond the grave. I wanted to ask more, but Grandfather would not speak further. He turned away, muttering that he had said too much already. Yet his words did not drive the hollow from me. They deepened it. From that night onward, I began to dream. In my dreams, I stood once again at the uneven soil behind the chapel. The fog curled low, and I could hear voices rising from beneath the ground, faint and desperate. They called in unison, as though bound together, but I could never make out their words. And always, in the distance, a figure stood among the fog, tall and still, watching me. Though I never saw his face, I knew in my bones it was the missing priest. The dreams grew so frequent that I dreaded sleep. Some mornings I woke with dirt beneath my fingernails, though I had not left my bed. Once I found my boots by the door, spattered with mud I did not remember walking through. My mother grew fearful, insisting I had brought something back with me. My father grew angry, forbidding me from leaving the house after sunset. But none of it mattered. The parish was in me now, and with each day I felt a strange pull, not away from life, but deeper into the mystery. I had thought the parish was only a graveyard of forgotten souls. Now I wondered if it was something more. A secret buried not only under soil, but under silence, meant to be hidden from us all. I told myself I would not return, that I had seen enough. But the dreams did not let me rest, and the image of the priest's absence gnawed at me. Where had he gone? Why had no one spoken of him? One evening, as I walked alone by the river, I found myself staring downstream, toward where the water wound its way past the ridges near the parish, and a thought entered my mind, so sudden and unbidden that I froze. Perhaps the priest was never buried because he still walked the fog. The thought terrified me, yet more than terror it awakened something else, curiosity. For if the priest still lingered, then the mass burial was not only the story of the dead, it was also the story of what lived on. And I knew then, with a certainty I could not shake, that my steps would one day carry me back into Hollow Parish. I tried to resist it. I told myself the valley had already given me enough, the sight of its ruins, the touch of its earth, the weight of its silence. But desire is a patient thing, and fear does little to weaken it. Each day, as I worked the fields with my father or helped my mother with chores, my thoughts drifted back to the chapel, the burial ground, and the figure I had seen in my dreams, the priest who was never buried. I began to notice things in my waking hours that unsettled me. When I walked near the tree line, the crows would scatter as though startled by something I could not see. When I passed by the river at dusk, mist curled across the surface, though no cold wind stirred it. Once, while bringing in firewood, I heard faint murmurs from the fog rising out of the lowlands. So soft I thought at first it was the breeze, but when I paused, I realized it was more than wind. It was the echo of voices, as if carried up from the valley itself. It was in those days that my grandfather grew frail. His strength seemed to ebb all at once, like a candle burning too quickly, toward its end. He spent most of his time in bed, speaking little. But one evening, when the rest of the family had gone outside, he motioned me closer. His voice was thin, but his eyes burned with the same intensity I had seen before. "You must listen to me, boy," he whispered. "You must not return to Hollow Parish." I swallowed hard. "Why not?" "Because the parish does not rest," he said, his hand trembling as it gripped mine. "The soil there holds more than bones. It holds a covenant. And once you've stepped upon it, the covenant begins to take notice." His words sank into me like ice. "What covenant?" I asked. He closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. "The priest bound them to something, though no one knows to what. That is why they were buried together, to trap what lingered. But the binding was never broken. It waits still beneath the fog." A shiver traveled down my spine. I wanted to ask more, but my mother entered the room, and grandfather fell silent. He never spoke of it again. Within a fortnight, he passed away, his last breath rattling like wind in dry leaves. The night after we buried him, I dreamed again. This time, the fog was thicker than ever, the ground soft beneath my feet as though freshly dug. The chapel loomed in the distance, its broken steeple pointing down like a finger of accusation. And there, standing at the edge of the burial ground, was the figure. I could see him more clearly now, tall, robed, his face hidden in shadow, though no hood covered it. He lifted his hand slowly, and the voices beneath the earth grew louder, pressing against the soil as though straining to rise. I woke with a cry, sweat soaking my shirt. My hands streaked with dirt once more. My father burst into the room, furious. He demanded to know what plagued me, but I could not speak. I could only tremble. My mother began leaving a bowl of salt by my bed, muttering prayers to ward off spirits. Yet none of it mattered. The priest was calling me. A week later, I could endure it no longer. I told myself I would go one last time, not to linger, not to explore, but to find the truth of what my grandfather had meant by covenant. I rose before dawn, slipping from the house while the sky was still dark. My boots found the same half-forgotten trails, my steps carrying me swiftly through the fields and thickets. By the time the sun began to rise, pale and cold, I stood once more at the ridge overlooking Hollow Parish. The fog was thicker than before, rising like smoke from unseen fires. I descended into it, heart pounding, breath sharp in my chest. The ruins loomed out of the mist as though they had been waiting for me. I passed the blackened cottages, the crooked chapel, and made my way to the burial ground. The soil looked different now. Where once it had been uneven but still covered in grass, now the ground seemed disturbed, as though something beneath had shifted. The grass lay dead in patches, leaving raw earth exposed. My pulse quickened. I felt as though the ground might break open at any moment. I knelt, pressing my hand once more to the soil. It was colder than before, and the faintest vibration stirred beneath my palm, like the echo of a drumbeat. I pulled back, startled. That was when I heard it, the whisper. It was not the murmur of many voices this time, but one, low, steady, clear. It spoke in words I did not understand, yet I felt their meaning in my bones. It was not a greeting. It was a summons. I turned, and there he was. The priest, no longer a shadow in dreams, but standing before me in the fog, as real as the earth beneath my knees. His robes were tattered, the color long faded, yet his bearing was unbroken. His face was pale, his eyes dark wells that seemed to drink the light around them. He raised his hand, and the whisper grew louder, rising from beneath the soil in answer. Could not move. My body was frozen, caught between terror and awe. The priest did not speak to me with his mouth, yet I heard his voice within my head. The covenant remains. The parish endures. Will you bear witness? The words thundered through me. My instinct was to run, to flee the valley and never return. But another part of me, the part that had longed to know, that had followed this mystery from the start, leaned forward instead. I wanted to answer, though no words formed on my tongue. The priest lowered his hand, and the whispers faded back, into the earth. He stepped closer, his presence heavy, suffocating. His gaze locked on mine, and I felt as though he were peering not into my face, but into my very soul. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the fog swallowed him. The valley fell silent again, though not as before. This silence was sharper, more watchful, as though it expected me to act. I stumbled back, breath ragged, heart hammering. I did not remember leaving the valley, only that I found myself at the ridge once more, gasping as the wind rushed around me. I staggered home, shaken to my core. That night, I did not dream, but I knew the priest had marked me. The covenant he spoke of was no longer just a story whispered by my grandfather. It was real, and now I was bound to it. And though I told myself I would never return, deep down I knew the truth. Hollow Parish was not finished with me. After that day, I could no longer pretend my life was the same. The fog of Hollow Parish had followed me, clinging to my skin and my thoughts. I moved through my days like a boy carrying a shadow too heavy for his frame. My mother noticed it. First, the way I startled at small sounds, how I no longer laughed with the other boys, how I sometimes paused in the middle of my chores, listening to voices no one else heard. She prayed harder than ever, her lips moving silently as she watched me. My father grew impatient, snapping at me to shake it off, as though the weight I carried were no more than laziness. But it was my own heart that betrayed me most. For, even as I trembled with fear at the memory of the priest, another part of me longed to see him again. The words he had pressed into me, the covenant remains, echoed in every corner of my mind. I felt them when I walked the fields, when I heard the river, even when I sat in silence. The covenant had not died with the parish. Somehow it lived still, and somehow it had chosen me to see it. At night the dreams returned, though they had changed. No longer did I see the faceless priest watching me from afar. Now I stood among the villagers themselves. Men, women, and children surrounded me, their faces pale and sorrowful, their mouths moving in unison. They did not scream or cry, they pleaded. Their words slipped beneath my skin like cold water, and though I could not always understand them, one phrase returned again and again. "Release us!" I woke from these dreams, gasping, my throat raw as if I had shouted in my sleep. The dirt beneath my nails grew worse, and one morning I found the hem of my nightshirt caked with mud. My mother nearly fainted when she saw it. She begged my father to fetch the priest from the next parish over, but he refused. "No outside priest will come near Hollow Parish," he growled, "and I'll not have him stirring up the boys' fancies." But the fancies were real. I could not ignore them. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, I returned to my grandfather's room. His bed was empty now, his belongings packed away. But I remembered his words. He had said the people of Hollow Parish had been bound, not merely buried. If that was true, then perhaps the villagers in my dreams were calling for me because I had stepped upon their grave. Perhaps I had become their witness, their only chance of release. I told myself I would not return to the parish. Yet one night, when the moon was high and the house quiet, I found my feet carrying me toward the valley once again. I moved as though in a trance, the world around me dim and distant. By the time I reached the ridge, the fog was already waiting, curling upward like smoke from a hidden fire. The ruins looked the same as before, but the silence was heavier. I walked slowly, each step echoing in my ears. When I reached the burial ground, I stopped short. The soil was no longer merely uneven. It had shifted, cracked in places, as though the earth itself strained under the weight of what lay beneath. My breath caught in my chest. And then I heard them. The voices. Not whispers this time, but a rising chorus, soft, yet unmistakable. They were chanting, low, mournful, steady. Their words rolled together, forming a rhythm that seemed to come from the very ground. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against the earth. The cold struck me instantly, sharper than before. My heart thundered as I realized I understood them. Their words were not in my tongue, yet meaning filled my mind as though carried on the bones of the sound. Release us. Break the covenant. Tears stung my eyes. I had never known such sorrow. Their voices carried no anger, only weariness, as if centuries of silence had drained them of everything but longing. I wanted to answer, but my throat would not open. And then the priest appeared. He stepped from the fog with the same dreadful, calm as before, his pale face fixed upon me. This time, though, he spoke aloud. His voice was low but resonant, like a bell struck deep within stone. "You hear them now," he said. "They call as they always have, yet no one listens. Until you." My body shook. "Why me?" I managed to whisper. "Because you came," he answered simply. "Because you bore witness when others turned away." The covenant binds them still. But the covenant requires a keeper. You have taken that place. His words struck me like a blow. I don't want this, I stammered. I'm just a boy. The priest's eyes darkened. So were they. Children buried beside mothers, infants in arms. Do you think the earth spared them because they were young? The covenant does not choose the willing, it chooses the present. The voices beneath the soil rose, louder, pressing upward like waves against a shore. My chest ached with the weight of their sorrow. What covenant? I cried. What binds them here? The priest's face hardened. Hope twisted into chains. They gave themselves to me, body and soul, believing they would be spared death. I bound them together in faith, and when death came anyway, their bond was too strong to break. They are one now, one parish, one voice, one grave. I felt sick. The villagers had not merely died. They had been held by their own devotion, their own desperate belief. And the priest, the man before me, had become both their leader and their jailer. Release them, I begged. His eyes burned into me. Only the keeper can release them. The fog swirled, thickening, and the voices rose to a wail that pierced my very bones. My body trembled, my vision blurred, and I felt myself sinking into the earth. For a heartbeat, I saw them, the villagers, countless faces pressed beneath the soil, their hands reaching upward through the dirt. I tore myself away, stumbling back, gasping for air. The priest watched me silently, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he stepped backward into the fog and was gone. The valley fell silent again, though I knew it would not last. I staggered home, my hands still shaking, my heart raw with terror and sorrow. I understood now. The mass burial of Hollow Parish had not ended the story. It had only buried it, binding the villagers together in death. And now, through some cruel twist of fate, I had become the one chosen to decide whether they remained imprisoned or were released. But how could I release them? What power did I have, a boy with nothing but fear in his chest? That night, as I lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, one truth echoed through me, relentless and terrible. If I did nothing, the covenant would endure. And if I did something, anything, it might break. The question was not whether I would return to Hollow Parish again. It was when.